Welcome to the Talk Like a Leader podcast, where we explore the mindset, skill set, and habit set of leadership communication. Using these tips, techniques, and tactics, you'll be able to talk like a leader to build better relationships and get more done. Your host is Guy Harris, who has more than 20 years of combined professional and military experience in consulting, coaching, and training in areas like team and interaction dynamics, communication strategies and tactics, as well as emotional intelligence. Take it away, Guy.
Hi, this is Guy Harris. Welcome to Talk Like a Leader. This week's episode is titled, Know Your Source of Communication Power. In the work I've done with my friend and colleague Kevin Eikenberry, we developed the book From Bud to Boss and the first-time supervisor course titled From Bud to Boss. Part of the content we talk about in that course is related to feedback conversations, coaching conversations, basically any type of conversation where you're engaging with the other person, member of your team, possibly a colleague, but probably a member of your team, and you're having a conversation about their workplace performance or their workplace results, and you're coaching them towards improving their results. One of the things we talk about in that piece of the book and piece of the content is what we call sources of feedback power, and I'm going to apply the same idea to sources of communication power. And what I mean by that is, where do you draw the power to communicate with another person from? The three basic sources of communication power are your position relative to the person in terms of power balance or imbalance, as the case may be. Meaning that if you are in a hierarchically higher position than the other person, it puts them in a mode of, if not wanting to listen, at least feeling like they have to. So that does contribute to your communication effectiveness. There's also your perceived expertise, meaning that the person with whom you're communicating believes you to be an expert in some capacity related to the content or the topic or the task or project type, something related to the thing you're communicating about. You're perceived by the other person to have some expertise in this area. Now, interesting thing about expertise is that it's not necessarily related to your actual expertise. It's related to your perceived expertise. And the point of that statement is that even if you have expertise in an area and the person with whom you're communicating doesn't believe or doesn't know that you have expertise in that area, you can't really draw on that as a source of communication power. Statements like, well, in my experience, or if I were doing this, comments of those kind basically draw on expertise power. And they will fall on deaf ears if the person with whom you're communicating doesn't grant you expertise. Then the third source of communication power is the nature and quality of your relationship with that person. And relationship is related to basically their perception or belief about your intentions with regard to them. Meaning that if they believe your intentions with regard to them are positive and helpful, then you're likely to have very strong relationship power in the communication. So the three basic sources of communication power are position, expertise, and relationship. Again, position is about power dynamic or positional influence perspective. Expertise is based on perceived expertise or knowledge in an area. And relationship is based on trust in your intentions. There are three independent sources that interplay with each other. In a perfect world, you would have all three going for you. You would have a position of, if not hierarchical, at least experiential power or strength relative to the person. They would believe you to be an expert in the area, and you'd have a great relationship. If you had all three of those going for you, communicating would be improved or simplified because you would have so much communication power in your corner. Now, just like the more you have of all three, the easier it gets to communicate with people. It's also true that the farther you go in the direction of only having position in your corner, the more difficult it gets to communicate with people. And I won't go into all the nuance here today, just make it a point to recognize that there are different sources of communication power And ultimately, you can only lean on the source of power you have from the other person's perspective. Now, what has this got to do with talking like a leader? Well, what I'm going to suggest is that for any communication and with any person, you need to know what you've got going for you in your communication with this person, meaning what are they prepared to believe about your communication? What do they see your position relative to them to be? What do they see your expertise to be? And what do they believe about your relationship? Know what you've got going for you. And then make sure you only use what you got. If you're not perceived as an expert, it's probably not going to help to say things like, in my experience. And ultimately work on developing all three. Because the more you got going for you, the easier and smoother your communication is likely to go. Now, in many cases, you have a relatively new relationship with a person. They don't know you very well. Don't really want to lean on position too much. Position tends to have a negative flavor to it if used by itself, meaning you tell people to do things or ask them to do things because, quote, I said so. Any kind of leaning on position like that will probably hurt the communication process. What I would suggest is you start by focusing on the relationship side and trust that the others will develop as you build your relationship with the person. So in the context of talking like a leader, recognize that there are really three big picture or big buckets of communication power you can draw on, three sources of communication power. Your position relative to the other person, your expertise as perceived by the other person, and the nature and quality of your relationship as perceived by the other person. Know what you've got going for you, only use what you got, and then work on developing all three so that you can strengthen the simplicity and depth and ease of communication with this other person. If you'll do that, you can talk like a leader. This has been the Talk Like a Leader podcast. You can listen to this show every week wherever you get your podcast. If you haven't, be sure to subscribe so you never miss an episode. I'm Guy Harris, and thanks for listening.